Welcome to this edition of The Hallway Track, the show for people who want to feel like they're actually at the show. This week we're doing KubeCon US Boston edition, but really virtual. As always, I've got a couple of guests with me. The amazing Victor Farsick over here to my side. Say hello, Victor.
Hey.
He recently joined me at CodeFresh, and we're having a good time. We got Dan Pop down in the corner.
Hello.
Dan Pop, of course, you're the field CTO of Sysdig, is that right?
That's correct. And I have a wonderful show called the Popcast, which CodeFresh is a sponsor, by the way. Amazing t-shirt. Check them out. Get Ops 2.0.
Good work. Let's not get ahead of ourselves. Austin is joining us from Lightstep. Austin, why don't you introduce yourself?
Hello, I'm Austin Parker, Principal Developer Advocate at Lightstep, probably best known for being the guy that ran the DevOps conference in Animal Crossing earlier this year.
Oh, wait, that was you? I didn't even know. We should actually, let's
from the top. Take it from the top, everybody. We got to redo the intros.
Can we start with that?
So we're here with the creator of Animal Crossing conferences to learn exactly what that means. But no, in all seriousness, that was a really cool project. We actually talked about that internally. So well done, Austin. I do want to hear about that more later.
Sure.
So first up, we are the first day of KubeCon. We've been watching sessions. I don't know how many of you were able to catch the keynote. But before we get to the keynotes, I just wanted to ask, what's the general impression about this show versus EU, KubeCon EU? Has the CNCF learned from the experience of hosting KubeCon virtually? Is it still lagging behind? What do you think?
I mean, judging by the number of how many times my connection broke during the keynote, I would say no. At one moment, I was compelled to switch to Netflix.
Too, right?
I think a lot of people had problems. You know, hug ups to our friends at Intrado, which is the platform that powers KubeCon. Obviously, it's a significant technical challenge to deliver to deliver streaming video to people, even though a lot of people do it. I will say, it's hard. I feel like it's actually very hard to kind of make a determination about how did they do or what did they react, because these sort of contracts that the CNCF assigned, it wasn't just, oh, we were really happy with this and so we did it again. It's well, they probably already are on the hook for doing this one through the same platform. And I think there's been a lot of feedback that is certainly being listened to by the CNCF and by their events team. And so I'm hoping that, between EU a couple months ago and this one right now, that for the next all virtual one, which will be KubeCon EU virtual next year, that we'll start to see some changes.
I think, I don't know if you all have seen, there's actually a hallway track within the CNCF Slack. And so it's really cool because people are interacting there. So when Priya said those amazing things about Dan Cohn, and RIP Dan Cohn, New Yorker, an amazing person, we wouldn't have this community if it wasn't for him. He's just a phenomenal dude. So RIP. Legend. But basically I think it was so cool because people were like, hey, we're having problems here, but people are just in the joy that is this community. People are like, okay, this is happening. Let's roll with it. And so that was a beautiful thing. I think we're seeing a lot more of that interaction than we saw at EU. It was a lot more of that, hey, this is happening and all of that. So again, kudos to CNCF for rolling with the punches. But again, the keynote stuff did get a little annoying there. I think it's completely out of their control. So
yeah. And I do want to say it was an extremely touching tribute during the keynote. I was on I think what's really cool about this, and one thing that maybe they did adapt is, and what I learned from doing the Animal Crossing conference is, you have to be willing to kind of let the community run with things. And so there's been a lot of community driven sort of Zoom calls and Ramblies, which is this cutie little voice thing where you run around as a 8-bit character. And these are all run by the community. People are just kind of throwing these things up in that hallway track room and going with it. And during that tribute to Dan, there wasn't a dry eye in the room, right? So it's good to see that. I would say that's one definite improvement over EU, is just getting out of the way and letting people kind of come together as they're able to.
Yeah, and I would say I actually noticed the same thing. I had a lot more Slack conversations going on during this one. After my session this morning, I hopped onto the Slack and had a good 45 minutes conversation with people. And it was like, I actually had just for a moment that feeling of like, oh, wow, this was kind of what it was like to be at KubeCon. Like, I actually having these conversations with people, and like people were coming over and they're like, oh, have you used this project? I'm like, I've never even heard of that project. What is it? Tell me about it. It's just like, yes, this is what I've been needing. And so I'm really glad to see that. And I think we actually started this show, the hallway track, back at the KubeCon EU, because we were missing that. And so I'm glad to see they added a hallway track in Slack. I'm glad that that there is more interaction happening elsewhere, and the community's kind of filling it in. Still, I think we all wish we were there in person, but you know, it's getting better. So I agree on all those notes. So that's a good transition point to the keynotes. I understand a lot of people had difficulty watching them. I actually wanted to watch them and had to join my session. Like I gave a session today at KubeCon, and I had to join during the keynote, so I wasn't able to catch them. So I'm hoping that you guys can give me the download of what was exciting and what happened. So why don't Dan Pop? Why don't we go to you first?
So one of my good friends, Steve Augustus and Constance, they were the two co-chairs for KubeCon this year. And, you know, they did a great job. Cheryl opened up with how the new CKS tests are, the, you know, the Certified Kubernetes Security test certifications. And she actually went on console and went through some of the, you know, the actual testing capabilities. Really cool when we were able to see some of that. And then also seeing, you know, Constance talk about some projects. You know, she talked about Thanos. She also talked about Falco, which is a CNCF project, you know, as well. So it was really cool to see some of the contributions of incubated and Sandbox projects. Obviously, you know, Priyanka was doing a good job. Also, I think Diane Muller from Red Hat did a really amazing job talking about, you know, just, you know, what's going on in the ecosystem and getting involved, which is her strong suit. But I took away, you know, what I could see of it. It was phenomenal. I can't wait to see the replay so I can kind of put the jigsaw puzzle together.
Yeah, Austin, what do you think?
I was really encouraged to see, sort of echoed multiple times, not just Priyanka's opening remarks. There was a very strong commitment to diversity, right? And one of the initiatives they announced was this idea of, hey, we're going to go and we're going to have a working group on inclusive language and making sure that, you know, terms that are maybe not cool with people, you know, language and the society evolves. And so we as technologists, as people in open source, we need to adapt and we need to move with that. So I was really encouraged by that, not only being sort of an opening part of the presentation and to see that deepening commitment, but also, you know, in Stephen's remarks about, you know, the Kubernetes project itself. The Kubernetes put up a very strong statement earlier this year that Black Lives do matter. And while that's not necessarily a political statement, people like to treat it as one, and the community, and with a lot of support from the CNCF and everyone, really kind of resisted sort of the people that, you know, come in and troll and try to make hay over things like that. And so it's really, you know, it's a great sign that we as an industry, we as like a inclusive space for people, can begin to address these things and talk about them, right? And actually do what little we can to make sure that open source is welcoming to everybody.
Yeah, good point, Austin. And Victor, I want to come to you in a second, but one of the things that I was interested in seeing, as I mentioned, I wasn't able to catch the keynote, but I did see that Apple actually had a keynote from Elena. I don't know how to say her last name, Prochiarch. I'm sure I'm saying it wrong, but Elena actually working at Apple and going and talking about the Kubernetes usage. I think this is really interesting because Kubernetes, well, Apple has not been an open source friendly company for 40 years. So that we might see that actually really changing. And so that's really exciting to see Apple actually coming and participating. I remember times when I've seen Apple reps in some of the working groups at the KubeCon developer days, and they like wouldn't talk to anybody. They wouldn't say anything. They weren't allowed to. So it's cool to see it changing like that and see that contribution coming on.
Well, are you seeing, I mean, one of the things, like there's two companies that are just gobbling up talent. It's Apple and Equinix Metal. I mean, they're grabbing all types of talent out there from the Kubernetes space. So it's, you know, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but basically the incredible thing is, and I called it today, pound Apple netties. It seems like, they're going in and, like hiring a bunch of Kubernetes talent. Duffy Cooley's another really, really amazing resource from that perspective. But, I'm just interested in what they're doing there. And, Elena's talk was good. Kind of, it's cool that she actually did it from the infinite loop. You can see like from the auto.
I was hoping they would have the drone tracking shots that they use for the Apple events.
I was hoping she'd be wearing
fly into it.
Get everybody in a turtleneck for the Apple keynote.
Yeah, right.
Victor, what did you think?
No, I mean, you guys already said everything that I had in my mind. I'm really thrilled that there is a lot of focus on the diversity. I mean, focus on open source, that's obvious, right? It's CNCF, it's open source. But that focus is shifting. I mean, not shifting, but the diversity is getting equal. Spotlight is really, really awesome. And then I was also impressed by the presence of Apple. And to me, that's very symptomatic that companies are starting or already understand that open source is not only because it's goodness of our hearts and we all like to contribute and all those things, but that it is becoming critical for everybody's business, right? And knowing Apple, there must be that reasoning settling in, right?
I'm sure now Apple probably runs the largest web object, the largest web objects deployment on top of Kubernetes in the world, and potentially the only one. I don't know. Maybe there's some IBM holdouts. An IBM person out here to ask.
I thought that Apple was, maybe I'm mistaken, but I thought that Apple was married for life with Mesos.
That's an interesting thing. I thought that they were extremely invested in Mesos.
I think that's right, but I think everybody sees the future. So,
including Mesos, apparently, because didn't I read that they aren't doing that anymore?
Well, yeah, they changed their names and they're focused really on Kubernetes now, and it's been a whole thing. But
yeah, so they're DTIQ now,
DTIQ.
And I think again, it's the functionality of Mesos. Yeah, it was very embedded at Apple, but I in seeing the talent that they've acquired, I would assume that they've pretty much already transitioned Kubernetes probably years ago. You know what I mean? Like before us, I know it's mere mortals knew about it.
I mean, they've had like Apple booths at KubeCon for years.
They've been recruiting. Well, that's actually a good time to transition into some of the other news. Of course, there are a number of surveys that came out with the kickoff of the CNCF. So if Taryn, you don't mind throwing up my screen here, the big one from the CNCF, the big headline was that containers in production jumped 300%. So tripling the number of containers in production. And of course, this is something that we've been talking about. I think last year we actually talked about how every company had adopted Kubernetes on 5% of their workloads. So it's really about seeing that workload count go up. And Victor, I know this is something that you've been talking about as well.
Everybody could predict this trend, right? We know that containers are increasing in usage, and they will continue increasing in usage, right? That's pretty obvious. Kubernetes will likely transform into something different from end user perspective, but containers will be there one way or another. And usage increasing is great, because I'm really disappointed with, when I see statistics, how many companies use Kubernetes. To me, that's irrelevant. What is the usage? What is the workload in those companies? That's really interesting data. The usage, it's how many of them use Kubernetes is irrelevant if you don't know the workload, right?
So
go ahead. One more comment, and then I want to move to another survey.
Yeah. So in terms of we've compiled some data at Sysdig in terms of container usage. We had a container usage report, I think, early in the year, compiling another one at this point. But when you see customers are using it, I think also there was gaping things that needed to be cloud native and they weren't, and having this pandemic be something as kind of an impetus to move over to these cloud. There was gaping holes in people using legacy technologies that should have been using cloud technologies, and so having them move over to these, I think, is this survey is completely justified in my eyes.
Yeah, and this is actually, I wanted to transition over to and look at another survey that came out from StackRox, where the only thing controversial I saw here was they were asking people how they orchestrate their containers, and this is a pick all that apply situation. So people are picking multiples in here, so the percentage is going to add up to well over 100%. But 50% said that they were using self-managed, and so they actually said this is the most common approach to managing containers. I actually think that might be wrong. I think maybe the largest segment says self-managed, but in fact, if you look at all the other ones and add them up, I think it's a larger segment are using a service than self-managed. And Victor, do you think that this self-managed is even accurate? Is this just Terraform? Is this kubeadm? What's
no, I cannot believe that this being self-managed. I think that people probably did not understand really the question. Like, yes, maybe if I spin up a GKE cluster with Terraform, then it's self-managed, and maybe then in that case, people check that box, right? But
or they think their local development environment is also
Minikube, right? If you use Minikube, you're self-managed.
Yeah.
I think
so anyone spinning up with cops, I mean, anyone running like cops or something like that to spin up an instance, it could be using EC2. So I mean, I don't know where these numbers were compiled. I'm sure that they're justified to a certain degree, but yeah, what I see, I can only say what I see is I do see a lot of self-managed, Kubernetes, or where somebody's just spinning up with, a cops cluster or using kubeadm, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I'm also seeing a lot of active customers using some of the other paradigms like OpenShift, some managed Kubernetes, all of those. So, to each their own, I guess.
Yeah, my big takeaway from something like this is looking at sort of the relative rankings of cloud of managed Kubernetes, right? Of the sort of big three, a surprising drop, I would say, for GKE, also a kind of surprising increase for AKS.
But is it surprising for GKE? I mean, given that their market share for cloud is relatively low compared to others, I mean, that figure kind of makes sense. Actually, I can even say that 90%, which is 45% compared to EKS, is a much higher percentage than compared to the market share that they have, right?
Well,
they're not close to half of AWS.
Yeah, they're saying that they lost 10% versus the previous survey, which is really surprising. I wonder if there's an effect where lots of people were piloting Kubernetes on GKE, and then they said, okay, now let's take it on Amazon with everything else that we do, because Amazon, of course, is growing very quickly, and they do have the largest market share.
I can understand the AKS, like Azure, in the sense of Azure is very popular for people kind of coming from traditional Microsoft shops that are moving into the cloud, and they make it very easy. And it's like, oh, okay, now that you're already in, let's talk about your new stuff, and let's talk about AKS, and let's talk about that. And it's all integrated very well into the sort of Azure management paradigms. But it's the drop, I guess, in GKE compared to, a 69% increase, to OpenShift. Like, that's surprising.
Yeah, the OpenShift one is interesting too. I do think there's a big acceleration happening with on-prem managed Kubernetes, and you see it there in Rancher as well. Rancher's a great product and really enjoy it. So it's interesting to see where it's going. But self-management, bare metal, definitely on the rise, as well as the cloud adoption. So pretty interesting.
The way how I interpret that is that, you have phases. First, individuals start playing with Kubernetes, and then smaller companies are jumping faster than bigger ones. And now, to me, this interpretation of this is that, yes, big enterprises are finally getting on board with Kubernetes. And that's why we're seeing that increase in OpenShift, increase in AWS, and potentially decrease in Google, because Google is traditionally not a favorite vendor of huge enterprises. I mean, not that they don't have any, right? But compared to AWS and Azure.
Yeah, but it's interesting stuff. Kubernetes is indeed eating the world.
Well, so this is actually a good transition into M&As, acquisitions going on. I haven't followed the M&A news too carefully, so maybe you'll be aware of some that I'm not. I did see that Cisco acquired Bonsai Cloud, which is an interesting move. And I think that there was another acquisition. Who was mentioning it beforehand? It was for an undisclosed sum. Dan Pop, were you talking about an acquisition?
Oh, that's an observability acquisition. IBM acquired Instana, which is a European observability tool. Or
Basically,
monitoring tool.
M&A remains pretty aggressive in this space. Every KubeCon, there's a bunch more.
I think that acquisition was based on some of their APM capabilities. Again, congrats to Instana. Great job. You know, IBM is a great partner of Sysdig as well, and you know, it's showing the power out there for cloud native technologies. You know what I'm saying? They're getting acquired by larger companies. I don't think this is going to be the last. We'll see how this week goes. It's KubeCon, right? We're always going to hear about acquisitions or funding rounds or amazing technologies. That's what makes this the world go round. So
yeah, I didn't see Tanzu on that list. Comment from the chat.
Hey Waleed, how are you? Good to see you.
What's up with Tanzu? Let's figure it out. VMware Tanzu. I have to dig into this one. Okay. Another story I wanted to look at together was DataStax. If we can put my screen up here. DataStax just released K8 Sandra. K8 Sandra, which is essentially a Cassandra distribution for Kubernetes.
So,
it's an official Helm chart. I'm not super familiar with Cassandra, but I know that Cassandra is a big deal in the enterprise.
Without a doubt. So the basis for a lot of where our metrics sit and some of our data points. So again, I work for Sysdig, so we do like metrics driven by kernel-based data for security and monitoring and troubleshooting, and all that data that comes in from our agent sits in a Cassandra database where you can disseminate it. You can do cool things in our UI and all that fun stuff. This is really cool because we have a lot of very large enterprises that are using like bare, metal deployments or Kubernetes level deployments that aren't like kind of have all the tricks and bells and whistles that are required for running Cassandra. DataStax is a market leader. And so having them kind of take this and kind of, create like a Kubernetes centric, data point, this is really cool stuff. So my hat's off to our friends at DataStax. They do some really cool stuff.
That was actually one of the things in the survey result that I saw. I don't know if I can find it, but there was a question about how many people are running stateful services. And it was like 40% of people were running stateful services. And Cassandra is, I believe, another stateful service. Again, I'm not very familiar with it. It's just an event store.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, it's a stateful service. I would say that I would gather, and again, Austin's probably a much more expert on this, but I would gather like something like a MySQL or still stateful things like Oracle or MS SQL are still being used in the enterprise, right? So
yeah, certainly. I mean, Oracle if we're talking about enterprise, at least like Oracle, also MS SQL is still very strong. And I think what you've seen, this is really a continuation of a trend that's been going on for several years now, which is moving sort of that persistent storage layer into Kubernetes as well, right? Like it's Kafka, it's Cassandra, it's MS SQL, it's Oracle DB, whatever it is. It doesn't have to necessarily be in the same cluster. It doesn't have to be managed in exactly the same way, but there's a lot of things that Kubernetes does for you. And a lot of those things are very useful to databases as well. So why not move them over into this new paradigm, right?
Yeah, and this was actually some of the Tanzu news that was mentioned in the chat here. Thanks again, Waleed. Tanzu SQL is now GA for Kubernetes. So it looks like we're seeing a lot more maturity coming around stateful services. I still have a bit of a hard time with it personally, but maybe I'm just not using the right tools yet.
I mean, a lot of it's just like storage has the Kubernetes. I am not super read into like Kubernetes storage. But my understanding is like Kubernetes storage has come leaps and bounds over the past several years, and it enables a lot of these technologies.
Yeah, more on that when we get to our top talks of the day section. But now I think we'll actually move into some of the Sandbox news that's going on. There were a number of new Sandbox projects announced. Cert Manager was one that I'm aware of that many of you use. I use Cert Manager actually in my own desktop cluster. So that was exciting news. There was another one, Tinkerbell, that I'm really interested in. Tinkerbell is a project for doing bare metal provisioning. And this is actually something that like I have been building myself. I've been setting up like my own PXE boot server on my cluster and managing this whole thing. Pretty cool to see this coming out of basically a really cool tool to set up so that your nodes can automatically boot and join a Kubernetes cluster and be automatically configured. Really cool to see. So that's enabling some more bare metal stuff. What about you guys? There's Cuervono, there's OpenCruise, there's Prevega, there's Schema Hero. Any of those sound like ones that you'd want to talk about? Go ahead and just shout it out.
Can I double click on? I can't believe I used that word. Can I talk about a Tinkerbell a little bit? So
yeah, sure.
That's a project that came out of Equinix Metal. Great people. Jason De Tiberius, he was for a while at VMware Tanzu, and I think CoreOS for a while as well. Great crew over there. I mean, again, we talk about the two companies like Apple and Equinix Metal are assembling like a crew of just amazing talent. So it's a great project.
Packet.io like a few months ago.
Right? Well, they rebranded from Packet to Equinix Metal. Right?
Oh,
so, yeah.
Packet's been around for a while too.
Yeah, New York company. Anyway, so based in Europe. So basically, what's cool about them is it's a project where, like you said, it's Pixie Boot. I can get Kubernetes. Yeah, I can get my instance up very quickly. I love that they donated that, and it's just really cool stuff. Really cool.
Yeah, Packet's a cool company, and I see now they were acquired by Equinix, and then they rebranded to Equinix Metal. I get it now. Okay.
I'll actually throw something out here. CD Cates, you didn't mention it, but I'm super into this sort of burgeoning cottage industry of hey, can we make it deployment as code, right? Like I want to say Pulumi, I feel like is doing this as well. But just the idea of more stuff to let you break away from just YAML everywhere and having to do a bunch of different, I don't know if Terraform is necessarily the right answer all the time for defining components and defining sort of infrastructure. So I'm excited to see stuff like CDK. I'm excited to see stuff like Pulumi and the growth in that. So
Pulumi and folks like Crossplane, like Upbound, they're very cool stuff. It's because you're basically using the Kubernetes objects, API objects, to be able to create things like, especially we talked earlier about multiple clouds deployments. I mean, I've talked to Hash Dan. He's actually on the release team now for Kubernetes, and he's at Crossplane. It's amazing. Like literally, I can go K-apply, and I can have a working instance in GKE, AKS, EKS. All we're talking VPCs, all created, all that, which is all of the minutia that we hate doing. It's all like done as part of this kind of primitive that you're doing with Kubernetes. So shout out to you all at Crossplane. And I'm not getting sponsored dollars from them. Okay, I'm not getting none from them. I'm not.
Well, yeah,
I'm also not getting sponsored dollars.
And something that's needed. There was another one that I saw that was really interesting, which was Prevega, and I'm not sure that I fully understand this one. Taryn, if you want to throw this one up, but this says it's a new storage abstraction, a stream for continuous and unbounded data. And this sounded really interesting, like for gaming or video applications. I don't know if any of you dug into this at all, but this was another interesting project that I definitely want to check out. Prevega.
You just go down to the architecture diagram and fall over from all of the extremely specific.
Oh yeah, I saw this and was like,
all right, check it out.
I don't know if I'm gonna be able to use this, but it sounds interesting.
I think there's a lot of streaming and reactive as a sort of design methodology is super hot right now, and it's cool to see what people build with this sort of stuff, right?
Yeah. There's also this Cuervono or Jose Cuervo brand policy agent that I saw.
Sure.
This looks like essentially a competitor to Open Policy Agent, but what we're seeing, it looks like, is a lot more security policy tools for Kubernetes services, which is again really cool because you can actually enforce policy from from a cluster perspective. So I was actually looking at some of their sample policies in here. So for example, they have this one that's disallow root user. And so you actually apply this as a cluster policy. So it's a CRD that then I guess goes around and beats up workloads that are trying to run as root or something. I don't know.
So I would like to understand that better. I mean, would it link up? Is it more like basically notification aspect, or is there enforcement aspect of it? And again, OPA does a good job of integrating with something like Gatekeeper and emission controllers. So like that would be the thing I'd like to understand. That's pretty cool though. It seems like it's more of a bespoke language than like OpenRego and all of that. So interesting. But there's a ton of OPA zealots out there, and it's a pretty amazing technology. So I'd like to understand where they differentiate beyond like ease of code beyond Rego. Yeah,
definitely. Well, some cool projects coming out of the Sandbox. Coming out from other news, K0s from Anthos. Did anybody see this and was immediately thinking that they ripped off K3s? Am I missing the boat here?
I'm getting sick of K number S naming.
Are we going to get into like negative numbers? K -8s.
Oh, remember there's K9s too, which is a command line tool for Kubernetes.
Oh, that's probably the coolest tool ever.
I don't want to.
K16. It's Kubernetes twice.
I mean,
twice the Kubernetes, none of the functionality.
You'll pay for twice the Kubernetes. You'll pay for the whole SEEP. You only need the edge.
Well,
that's a free tagline for any of you getting at edge computing.
Yeah, so K0s is a project that was just announced, I think, by Anthos, and it aims to be a very simple bare metal runtime for Kubernetes. I kind of feel like their name is just a little too close to K3s, and Rancher already made like a really brilliant bare metal Kubernetes implementation that I love. So I don't know if I love the name, but I do like seeing these simple. Basically, most of these seem to boil down to just getting rid of etcd.
Yeah, Kubernetes Lite.
But to me, kind of what is curious is that first Anthos decides we're going to buy all Docker assets, and then we're going to double down on Kubernetes. Kind of like we're going to get Swarm first, Enterprise Edition, and then double down on Kubernetes. That's really curious, let's say.
Yeah.
They see where the wind's blowing too, I guess.
Another piece of news, Solo.io introduced Glue Mesh Enterprise, just sort of a rebranding of their platform, and I think some additional tooling. I don't know if any of you have had the experience of working with Glue. I really like it. I was very, very impressed.
I love it. I also know Adit, and it's a really cool thing that I wish I had. Like, it solves the problem that it solves so well. Is maybe the best way to put it. Like, there's a lot of technology out there, but there are sometimes you see something that's like, oh, this actually fixes a very real problem that people have, but to me, it's like a problem that I am never going to experience anymore, or at least not right now. And so it's kind of like, oh, I wish I could use this, but I can't, or I don't have a reason to.
So Edith's been on my show. Fantastic. That person knows everything about this space, WebAssembly, service mesh, API, gateways, all of that. And then you also put together Christian Posta, who's, their global field CTO. Incredible person. And so like what they did was, I think they made it less, they had a lot of sub projects and things they're working on. Now they just made it very easy for you to understand like this platform that they have. Shout out to the crew over there. Again, great technology. Edith's phenomenal, and so is the team over there. So good stuff that they're doing.
Yeah, if you get a chance to check out Dan Pop's interview on the Popcast with Edith, that's a great place to go to check out Solo. They were also on the Kubernetes podcast a while ago, so you can check out episode 55 of the Kubernetes podcast to get that. But I think the Dan Pop.
Dan, how come you don't have mine queued, man? How come you don't have mine queued, brother? What's up with that?
I'm sorry, I didn't have it queued. We pull it up. So anyway, Solo.io, that's a cool. Glue Mesh is pretty cool, and I love seeing maturity coming out of that project because it's been a really cool one this whole time. Let's see, there's a ton of stuff that was announced. There's Pinniped. These names, man, are getting rough. And And this is basically access control for your cluster, so you can kind of user authentication on steroids, it looks like. Which is
so needed, so needed. I mean,
Yeah, super valuable.
It's incredible having to do like bindings and all the things you have to do like for Kubernetes. And so making this easy, pats off to them. I have not played with it, but I've heard good things. So yeah.
Yeah, I would bet that they have YubiKey support or like single sign-on support. I've seen people in the community doing stuff like that. So I'll have to check it out. And I don't know if they do or not, but it could be interesting. There is also Shipa launched Catch, which is deploy cloud native applications to Kubernetes without a single YAML file. I think it's basically similar. Well, I guess maybe this is more like a serverless competitor now that I'm looking at it. I don't know if anybody is familiar with this. Shipa.
So I've talked a little bit to Bruno Andrade, who's I think their founder over there. And, you know, I it's basically like application management framework. So I don't think it's CNAB capable. I think there's capabilities of there, but it's basically like just, updates and all of that. So I have to play more with it, but it seems like it's promising.
It's a lot.
Catch is definitely promising, and Shipa in general. I think that's probably what Shipa is doing is what I believe we will be seeing in abundance in next year, and that is that we are missing that layer on top of Kubernetes that will allow masses to use it. Right now, Kubernetes is still for a very, very small percentage of skilled people who dedicated lives to Kubernetes, right? And that will not change without something like Shipa. I mean, there are others that will simply put that layer on top and say, okay, this is now simple. You don't need to write 5,000 lines of YAML for your application, pim pam, and it's running, right? To me, Shipa is similar in a way like Google Cloud Run, right? Just different approach, but both are trying to do that same thing of simplification.
Yeah, and I don't think this is the thing, but it might be used in the thing. So like kind of like we've been talking for a long time. Oh, it's going to be the year of the Linux desktop. It's never really happened exactly, but instead we got Android, which was like, okay, well, like half of the world is using Linux on their mobile phone now. And then we got Chromebooks, which are really Linux underneath. And so we did get implementations that use Linux. We just never got like Ubuntu never really like caught on as like the desktop thing. But I assume that Kubernetes is going to go through something similar. It's people that are building some kind of offering that's packaged Kubernetes as a backend in some way.
If you think about it, like 5 years ago, it was very much like platforms, right? Like platforms as a service had its moment in the sun, and you saw your cloud foundries and you saw your Herokus and things like this. And all we've been doing is trying, in a lot of ways with Kubernetes, is trying to reinvent that by breaking it down to its component parts and then giving you 30 different options for each of them. I'm excited to see where it is, because I used to work for Apprenda, which was a platform as a service company, and so much of what's going on, like Open Policy Agent or the what we were just talking about with Cuervono, like these are the features.
Jose
Cuervo, sorry, but those are features that we had in Apprenda, right? For policy, making sure that workloads had to meet some certain criteria. Things like, hey, you just feed it a zip file and all the deployment manifests are created. Like, it's interesting that we're kind of building back to that point, but giving you a lot more options and doing it all in an open source way, which I think is a better way to get there. Like, I definitely like the idea. It's like, oh, there's all these options and you can build your own thing, which works for something like Apple, right? Like, they're never going to just take some proprietary off the shelf thing.
Yeah, agreed.
It's something Brendan Burns said when it was on my show. It was like, basically they wanted, Kubernetes to be at a point where it's not so much the back end kind of node manager operations aspect. It's how can I quickly deploy, my thing onto this thing, right? It's that those, I think, for the next couple of years are going to be because I think we've stabilized, like, back in deployment and keeping it up and running. People know how to do that at this point to a certain degree, right? It's now I need to deploy my application quickly, update my application. So things like this will help. So,
well, and to get insight into what's actually happening with those applications, there's another new announcement, which is the Project Headlamp shining a light on the
Ah.
Kubernetes user experience.
We need to talk about this. These are great. Like honestly,
I love
Kinvolk,
Kindle.
everything they touch is it's inspired. They go to the degree on what they're doing. Headlamp's another example where you have this capability. They're tapping into kernel. They were the people again that gave you Flatcar, which is like the container OS, derivation, like it basically like that has it's basically the most secure version of the underlying nodes that are the OS that's running for container. And so like it's incredible. Again, hats off to Andy Randall and Joaquim over there and Chris Cool, great people. And again, great technology. Go check it out right now, download it, use it. It's amazing.
As someone that just discovered kubectl top, I could have used this a while ago. It would have been nice. But you've actually used it, Dan Pop? All
the time. So they have something they've integrated called Inspector Gadget. And again, with Sysday, we use very similar technology. We're using tapping it to eBPF in the kernel to be able to do syscalls, to be able to kind of give you that, okay, my pod is crashing. So being able to trace loop that, to be able to figure out why that thing happened. They, are doing it in a way that you're getting this out of this Flatcar, what they call Locomotive. It's a version of, Kubernetes. They're doing the underlying OS is called Flatcar. And so there's this plugin technology they have that you can do things like figuring out why your pods are crashing and all of that. So, again, and this is all part of the distribution that they have. So it's very cool.
Very interesting. Okay, very cool.
I can also say, just like having worked with Kinvolk on some projects, some CNCF projects that were not Kubernetes, super, super smart people. Really a pleasure to work with. Love that entire team. 2 thumbs up to Kinvolk.
And the other part of this too is there's the altruistic nature of what they do. They're the ones that started the Rejects conference. You heard about it? That's basically the conference where if your talk was not accepted at CNCF, they were going to have you do this talk. Just beautiful people. Like it's just like they are. If you want to look in the dictionary of what good open source people are, you look at Chris Cool and that team, because that is the litmus test. That's the mark of what we all should aspire to be.
I wish I was wearing my Rejects shirt. I've spoken at pretty much every Rejects conference because I'm pretty good at getting talks rejected.
The one thing I really missed from KubeCon EU this year, I was really looking forward to going to Rejects.
Me too.
Yeah, definitely a bummer in this virtual world to miss Rejects, which is a lot of fun. Other news, we also got Anthos just came out with their developer sandbox, which is now free with the Google account, allows you to play with Anthos. Anthos has been a lot of hype, but I haven't seen a lot of pickup in the community and excitement. So this feels like the right move for them to get this into people's hands. It seems to promise a lot, but I haven't actually been able to use it yet.
I'm not sure how much that would ever pick up in a community, right? It's not really aimed at the community. It's aimed really at big enterprises that have the need.
Well, that's what I mean when I say the community. I mean the like I don't ever talk to people, working at big enterprises, and they're like, oh, well, we're all in on Anthos, just it's too new.
I think you'd be surprised. I think there are folks kind of investigating it. There are a lot. And again, because if you think about Google, right? Google obviously gave us Kubernetes. So you're always going to try to go to the source of that. And then being able to say the technologies that are being used at the enterprise, Google was doing this. So this could be useful. So, again, I think what this developer sandbox, I think the capability of that is so that you have a plugin, I can spin up something quickly. It's going back to how can I quickly get my application out there. For somebody to understand Kubernetes and deploy their application to it, we need to get to a point where people just click a button and have an IDE and have it, deploy a pod. And so this to me is very promising. I also integrate what I thought was cool is it spins up in this instance and gives you like a mini cube instance. So shout out to Thomas and the team over there. But basically like you can do some really cool stuff. So you get this mini cube instance that's part of the, if this is the same thing, I think it is. Like I can deploy my pods and I got my IDE capabilities there. So yeah, it's pretty cool.
I think more things like this in general are like a great idea, right? Like as a developer, right? Or as I'm a developer advocate now, but I started out in DevOps and programming. And it's just like when someone tells you about something new, like the way you want to experience it is through a sandbox. You want to just be able to go and like, okay, show me what it does. Let me dig into this, because I'm not going to want to sit through a demo. I'm not going to want to read, all the marketing pablum on the site. I just want to see how it works, get in there, start using it. And I think this is a very good move towards that. And I would love to see more developer tools, kind of embrace the idea of just like, hey, yeah, give people the tools and let them use them.
Well, this is a good point to go to my favorite news of the week. And of course, we are rounding the bend here. We've got about 14 minutes left. But this, of course, was the launch of GitOps 2.0 from CodeFresh. And look at this blog post that I wrote about it.
If you go to codefresh.io/popcastpop, it's a really good link for you to use. Sorry, good idea.
That's right. CodeFresh Popcast Pop will take you there. The referral link from Dan Pop. So this is basically CodeFresh, and CodeFresh, I should be clear, is the company that I work at and Victor works at. We launched this week our GitOps offering. And we're calling it GitOps 2.0. The goal is not really to say, hey, we've built GitOps 2.0. It's here. Come use it. It's really, we envision a world of GitOps 2.0, and this is the first step towards that world. So solving problems like observability in scale, where you've got maybe thousands of Kubernetes clusters that you're doing GitOps on. How do you solve observability there? How do you track down issues, figure out what Jira tickets are deployed, trace the entire development process? That's what we're trying to solve here. So this was pretty exciting for us. And I know that Dan and Victor are fans, but I'll go to you, Austin, because I don't want to get the one.
How do you solve observability? I think this is very cool. Like I've used CodeFresh. I like CodeFresh. It's a really good application and tool for solving these problems. I think that what you're doing is really interesting. My only, not even quibble or qualm, is just that observability, I feel like as a term of art, has gone from being like this very specific description of things to being completely overloaded in record time. Because I mean, this is an observability tool, but so is like New Relic, so is all these other things, right? So is Lightstep, so is Honeycomb. Just to keep tossing in brand names so that I seem unbiased.
But no, I think
you hit on
what the hell's going on, right?
But well, so that's the thing, right? There's actually been I've had discussions about this. Like, is the right word actually understandability rather than observability? Right? Is the problem not that we can't see things? It's because I think observability implies, to me, as a person that works for an observability company, some very specific things about application and infrastructure telemetry data and how you look at all that. But I think this idea of understanding is much deeper and actually is very cross-cutting. And I think you see a lot of sort of action on this. We've passed the news, or I guess we're still in the news segment, but there was a thing going around Twitter about some company getting $5 million to fix DevOps or whatever, right? And you go look at their thing, and it's a service catalog. Right? Yeah. No, that was my exact reaction. Only five. I could fix DevOps for less than $5 million.
Only costs $5 million to fix it.
Yeah, VCs, if you're listening, my price is much cheaper. But I think there's this idea. We have all hit on like this very real problem, which is like at a certain scale, all this stuff breaks down. The complexity becomes unmanageable. And how do you start to understand that? Well, I think Backstage, which was a Spotify project that got donated a little while ago to the CNCF. It's in Sandbox, and it's a service catalog, right? I put my services here. I have my run books in here. I have links to all my other stuff. Like, on some level, we're just reinventing wikis. We're reinventing Google Wave, or to go back even further, we're reinventing CyberDog, which is a real old pull. But the idea of I have a document or I have some sort of source of truth that can connect to also dynamic data sources and help me understand what's going on right now and what happens, and when something breaks, where do I go to fix it? Like, that is very, very valuable. And so that's what is very exciting, I think, about this GitOps 2.0 stuff. Like, this is where this industry needs to move towards. And so it's good to see people doing that. I just wish you wouldn't make it harder for us to do SEO on observability.
Well, Victor, I'll give you the final word on GitOps before we move on to the next topic.
On GitOps?
GitOps 2.0, the announcement, and observability, whatever you want.
I don't know. I mean, GitOps is one of those things that, I mean, realistically, it exists for like 20 years. We got a new term, which is a good thing because it makes us focus on that something that some were practicing for a long time. And like almost everything else, it gets perverted over time. I know, like Agile, 5 years after they came up with it, became something completely different. And DevOps, nobody knows what it is today. And I think that we do need those occasional resets to kind of put things back on track.
Well,
And,
stay tuned. Yeah, stay tuned. I think tomorrow we'll hear something interesting as well around GitOps. Moving right along, we are in the last 9 minutes, and I want to give some time for us to talk about our favorite talks of the day, the talks that we think people should not miss. And so for that, let's go to you, Dan Pop, for your favorite talk of the day. Do you have a pick?
So I have a couple, of course, real quick. So first off, Justin Garrison, as always, just killed it today. Justin used to work at Disney, guest on the podcast, really good person. He wrote, a book on understanding kind of cloud native infrastructure. He animated it. You need to see it. It's something that I don't think has ever been done at a show. I also want to give out a shout out to one of MathWorks did a talk about Falco, and basically they were talking about a bunch of serious kill chain stages. So Falco is the CNCF project that Sysdig donated that's doing behavioral rules analysis for things like intrusion detection and all of that fun stuff. And you just seeing end users use it was phenomenal, and they did a great job. So shout out to MathWorks.
Yeah, good call. And Austin, what about your favorite talks?
I will also put a vote in for the Ultimate Kate's Home Lab talk.
Did you actually attend it, Austin?
I didn't, but I saw every single person on the Slack talking about it, so it's on my list to go back and watch. I was actually watching a different talk at the time, which was Joe Thompson from HashiCorp did a talk called "Stop Writing Operators," which I was very interested in because it's something I'm working on right now, kind of with a project I'm working on with OpenTelemetry. But there's this open question of hey, I think a pretty big area of growth is going to continue to be software for Kubernetes, not software that runs on Kubernetes, but you're developing components, you're developing things that are going to enhance the cluster, are going to talk to the API, are going to be doing stuff. And I'm really interested, okay, how do you start deploying those? How do you tell people to consume those for their clusters? And he presented a lot of really good trade-offs and really interesting discussion of okay, what are you actually, what does it actually mean to do this? You've increased your security risk surface. You've added kind of this big question mark, this black box to end users. What are the other options? What are the trade-offs? So it was a really, if you're interested in that sort of topic, then it was a very good, nuanced sort of discussion about operators and the trade-offs thereof.
Yeah. I'm aware of some companies that have over 500 operators that they've developed, and it feels like they could definitely use
that. Feels like a lot. I think Joe would probably say that's too many.
Victor, what do you think?
Second favorite was operators. The one I liked the most, actually, which probably wasn't that interesting to people, was Helm past, present, and future. Not that much because of what was said, but more because I'm so missing that live, something being live in a conference and people just chatting and talking about something instead of having a pre-prepared speech. That's the one I enjoyed the most. It was just a chat between three people about Helm, right? And it made me feel like I'm in a conference again.
Yeah, that's pretty special.
I will actually add an addendum to this because we were talking about talks we like today, but if we can move the time window back 24 hours, I would like to plug OpenTelemetry Community Day, which was yesterday, which was an unconference. And we had a ton of breakout sessions and things like that. So if you are interested in observability or application telemetry, then please keep an eye out on the CNCF YouTube in December, because I think all of the talk videos will be going up there.
Oh, good.
But that was really cool, because that was, like what you said, a bunch of people talking, right? It was just people proposed breakouts, and we would split it up into like, okay, you 30, 40 people go over here into a Zoom and chat about, whatever. Chat about how do I observe deployments, right? How do I use this stuff in production? So it was really cool.
Yeah, great plug, Austin. And so I'd say for my part, my favorite talk of the day was Aaron Alpars from Kasten. He did a talk called Clean Up Your Room. What does it mean to delete something in Kubernetes? Which honestly was so useful because I've had this experience many times. I just have this automatic thing. Anytime I'm rolling out changes to my storage that I have to go and edit the YAMLs to delete the finalizers. And I've never actually bothered to learn what the heck those finalizers are even supposed to do. I've just been irritated that they exist. So his talk was really informative about finalizers and how the delete process works. And of course, I will plug my own talk, the Quest for the Ultimate Kubernetes Home Lab, which was just a lot of fun. Got to present the cluster that I built on my desk that's sitting next to me right now, churning away happily. And had a really good discussion with people. And the Slack was just like, people were just coming out with all these questions. They were really interested. So I really had a great time and could just not feel more loved at the moment from the Kubernetes community. So I really appreciate it.
Like I said, I
this panel too, Dan. We love you, buddy. Right?
I wanted to see that, and I was watching the Slack while I was in the other talk, and there were so many people talking about the Home Lab one. So,
well, that does bring us to the end of today's show. Again, this is the Hallway Track, the show for people who want to feel like they're at the show. Join us for day 2. We've got Jessica Dean. We've got Kat Cosgrove. I think Dan Pop is coming again on Friday. Matt Baldwin's going to show up at some point. We've got a stellar cast of characters. Again, thank you, Austin. Thank you, Dan Pop. Thank you, Victor, all of you for joining us. It's a lot of fun, and we're going to be watching KubeCon with you all tomorrow. And feel free to hit us up on Twitter. You know our usernames. Check out Dan Pop's podcast, The Popcast, for great fun and interviews in the industry. And as always, this is CodeFresh Live. My name is Dan Garfield. We are CodeFresh, signing off. Take care, everybody. Good night.
Bye, everyone.
Cheers.